of land right on the Winooski River as co-op. I'm Carl Etnayer. I serve the co-op as president of the council. And on behalf of the entire council who is hosting tonight's event, I want to thank you for coming here. I'd like the other council members to please stand up so you know who they are. Thank you. All right. We have council elections coming up in September, and there are 4 of us on the council whose terms are ending now. We are always looking for new people who are interested in being on the council. This is the period of apply, nominate, run. And if you want to nominate yourself or get other folks to nominate you for council or apply for a grant, am I getting that right? Yes. Apply for a grant as a community organization or nominate somebody who's done a particularly good job of holding up the co-op values in the community. This is a time to do so. The good folks here at Community Relations will help you out on how you do that. The deadline for all of that is June 23rd. And I want to thank the good folks at Community Relations for coordinating, putting this on together. It's a wonderful work that you guys have done. I want to thank the prepared food people for making this feast for us. And we did not plan to have live music in this program. Aaron Marcus, a distinguished local musician, volunteered. Thank you so much, Aaron. Well, it's an exciting time to serve on the Co-op Council. In 2023, when my current term started, we had just survived a flood. We'd survived a fire. There was a lot of leadership turnover. In 2024, we finished a project hiring a new general manager. We hired Mary Mullally as new general manager. Right here, Mary, give a wave. Yeah. She took the position after having a career already of 19 years at the co-op, where she started as a cashier, and she's been doing great work. In 2025, we bought the property next to the store, and we broke the $30 million barrier in annual sales. Now, the property next door, we could call it the old Allen Lumber place or the old R.K. Miles place, because it was so briefly in the ownership of R.K. Miles. And that would be consistent with the Vermont tradition of giving directions by places that don't exist anymore. You know, you go to where that barn was at the crossroads and then turn left. But we decided to look forward, so for now, at least we're calling it 707, the 707 project, or 707 Stonecutters Way. That's the address. 623 Stonecutters Way is where the store is right now. Maybe it's not inspired, but maybe we'll change that. Maybe it'll stick like number 10 Pond. We'll see. Anyway, in 2026, now we are starting, this is why it continues to be exciting, we are starting a strategic planning process to figure out what to do with that property and what to do with our business in general. We would be doing this even if we hadn't purchased the property next door. That just gives us more possibilities. We have people coming to us, recognizing us as business leaders in the area and saying, I have an opportunity for you. I have a place for you to rent. Excuse me. They speak better than that. Thank you, Mary. I have a place for you to rent. I have an opportunity for you to buy a kitchen, this or that. And it was the folks who owned the property next door got in touch with us. And so we are recognized, we have opportunities, and we want to know how to handle them when they come up in the future. So expect to, we have a committee of 8 people who are leading this process. We just had the first meeting of one of the committee members right here, Paul Olson. Thank you, Paul, for your service there. Is there any other committee member? Jeff Roberts is on the council. He's also on the committee. Any other committee member? Mary, of course. Yeah, anyway, thank you, committee members. We've just received 6 proposals from consultants who want to help us in this year-long process, so expect to hear much more about all of this in the coming months. In the meantime, the council wanted to use this meeting of the membership. This is an annual dinner and discussion event that we have. We wanted to use this to discuss the landscape around the co-op, and you're in for a real treat tonight. I first got to know Kasia Ranjo through a book discussion group around this book. It's called Seek Higher Ground, The Natural Solution to Our Urgent Flooding Crisis. And the River Conservancy has a bunch of copies of it. I was able to borrow this one, and I'm leaving it with Kasia to give away to the next person that wants to read it and then return it. This book is a sobering, frank look at what it means to live next to water that floods in an era of climate change, and when it might be advisable to move to higher ground before the waters force that move. Kasia serves the Vermont River Conservancy as executive director. She joined VRC's staff in 2021. Before that, she has nearly 2 decades of experience at state and national conservation nonprofits. Throughout her life, Kasia has found ways to bring people together to envision a better future and realize positive change for communities, and that's what we're hoping to do tonight. She's going to give you some information about Vermont's rivers and Montpelier's watersheds. I hope it will help us explore both the opportunities and responsibilities of living well next to the Winooski River. There will be some time for questions afterwards. Unfortunately, I'm leaving in just a little bit for a play rehearsal tonight, so I won't stick around for that. The show must go on, but you'll be in the capable hands of Mary Mullally for the question period. Kasia, please take it away.
Hello, thank you so much for the invitation to be here tonight. I'm going to have to practice my radio voice after Carl here. My name is Kasia Ranjo, Executive Director of Vermont River Conservancy, and I know the little blurb for this event says that I would be sharing some opportunities for living well along rivers and what the co-op might consider, and especially with this new land. And so I just want to say I'm not going to answer that question. You're going to need all sorts of planners and consultants and engineers and landscape architects and all those things to figure that out. But what I am hoping to do is plant a few little seeds and see if they grow, and especially see if we can all think about our rivers in some new ways. So I'm going to begin in maybe an odd place, but I'm going to take us halfway around the world to the Okavango Delta in Botswana. And maybe some of you have been there. My parents went there years ago. And my daughter, she's almost 10. Well, she turns 10 in a week, so that's like 10 in a 9-year-old's language. So she's almost 10. And a lot of times in the winter, she says, at night, she says, "Can we watch a movie?" And when she asks, "Can we watch a movie?" what she means is, "Can we watch nature on PBS?" And we're big PBS fans, and one of our favorite shows this winter was Big Cats 24/7. And this has some really lovely stories about specific lion prides and the cheetah moms and their cubs. And as we were watching this winter, it's really clear that behind these really lovely stories of the Okavango Delta are these stories of water. And what the water is bringing to life in this delta is all this amazing, phenomenal, world-renowned biodiversity. And so you get to see the lions and the cheetahs and the antelopes and the giraffes and really revel in this remarkable celebration of the stunning diversity of life that rivers bring to this special place. And what's really extra remarkable is that we have that here too, right here in our backyard in Vermont. And I think it's easy to forget sometimes and think you have to go halfway around the world to have this amazing life. But we have that here, and I don't know how many of you have been watching our rivers this spring. And there's a way of watching rivers in town, and there's a way of watching rivers when you go upstream a little bit and see our rivers just do this natural thing they've been doing for millennia before we've ever been here, and just overflow on the land and spill into these little oxbows and little nooks and crannies that we may not have even noticed were meant to hold water until it's springtime and the rivers do their thing. And that's just like the Okavango Delta. And there are places where rivers just naturally discover some places that they haven't seen in a long time each spring. Maybe you've been out on a walk, on a favorite hike, and just maybe your ear caught you first, and then you realize you're near this like amazing vernal pool that just appeared overnight and welcomes back this diversity of life. And how many of you have been falling asleep to the sound of an amphibian chorus? That is my like absolute favorite thing to do every year. I just open the windows and welcome in all those songs. And it is just so beautiful, right? And that's the diversity that's in these watery places that we call home. And these are the spring peepers and the tree frogs and the silent amphibians, like the little newts, and the blue-spotted salamanders, and the yellow-spotted salamanders. And these places welcome back our songbirds, like the red-winged blackbird, one of the first signs of spring, right? We all get so excited when it comes back, and it's the water that's welcoming these creatures back. Green herons, kingfishers, owls, gray egrets. And this begins to look a little bit like the Okavango Delta, right? This is like world class right here. And we got our mammals, we got our beavers, which we love, minks. All of these creatures is this amazing diversity of life that's made possible by our rivers. And our rivers also are places that bring so much joy. And so we're headed into Memorial Day weekend. For a lot of us, this is kind of like the kickoff to summer, right? And I would say that right up there with like Creamies as a quintessential Vermont experience is the swimming hole. And so this is just like the joy that these places bring. Places to paddle, kayak, and places to connect with each other across generations. This is a photo from North Branch Cascades, just 15, 20 minutes up the road. I hope you have all been there, and if you haven't, you're going there tomorrow. It's beautiful. And this is one of dozens and dozens of places that Vermont River Conservancy has protected to make sure people can always access the joy of our rivers. And our rivers are also home to farms, of course, right? And the reason that our farms along rivers are so rich and produce so much food is because they flood. And our floods are this real life-giving, nutrient-filling source for our farms. So what does this mean for Montpelier as I go on and on about rivers? For hundreds, Montpelier was built on the river's floodplain. And so this is an 1820s woodcut. Some of you may have seen this. This was in the Walgreens kind of storefront for the Montpelier Lives bridges lighting up. But you can see in this picture how the land is just gently sloping down to the river. On the left there, just beyond where the confluence of the North Branch, there are a couple little small farms that slope down to the river. And you can, of course, see the completely deforested Hubbard Park in the background. And what was here before this was likely a floodplain forest, wetlands kind of environment. And something that sticks with me, I was giving a presentation a few years ago, and somebody in the audience whose family has been in the Meadow neighborhood for a really long time raised his hand and they said, you know, the Meadow neighborhood is called the Meadow because it was a beaver meadow. It was a wetland, and it was the meadow, and that's why, and you know, it just seems kind of obvious, but you need somebody to say it to think about it, right? And this is the type of place that we built what is now Montpelier. We tried to capture a little taste of this last year. I don't know, you all probably have seen these benches downtown. So Vermont River Conservancy commissioned this project with local artist Sabrina Fadile and Flywheel Arts. And it's literally a place to pause because you can sit there. But it's also a place to pause and think for a second, wait, what are cattails and ferns doing here? Like, what is this? And it should be a more of a wetland environment and hopefully like have that little nugget of thought about what our downtown once was. So what happened to our wetland floodplain forest here? So really we built right up to the river's edge and more than that. This is looking, that's Bailey Dam on the left just by Shaw's. And then on the side of the river there, it's basically where the Sunoco and the downtown Montpelier sign are. Just for orientation, it's about 1900s. And so we built right along the river, and we looked to the rivers for power. We dammed the rivers. We stayed straight in the rivers. This is upstream on the North Branch. Lauren, who owns North Branch Cafe, likes to call this Montpelier's Venice Canal, which is really pretty fitting, right? And for several hundred years now, we have been shoving our rivers aside and telling them to stay where they are put. But if we know one thing about water, water doesn't really stay where it's put. And it's never going to stay where it's put. And I don't have to remind any of you about that reality. So what do we do about this? So this is for starters, we need to zoom out and look at the watershed as a whole and consider our place within the broader watershed. This here is an after-school class that was led by Wilder Arts. It was a whole series after the floods where they built this watershed model and had different people join to talk about different aspects of flooding. So I just joined for a day. And these kids were sitting with the question that we are all sitting with today, which is, what does it mean to live alongside rivers that flood? I shared a little bit with these kids that you all ought to know if you don't already. So I'm going to share a little doom and gloom here, but climate change in Vermont means more floods and more droughts. So if you didn't all know that already, I want to make that clear because that's what our future holds. And the reason for this is manyfold. But a couple very simple things are rain on snow events. So the jar on the left has snow in it. The jar on the right was empty. And we took like a half cup of water and poured it into each jar. And as you can see, the one on the left with the snow overflows and floods really quickly. So that's what happens, you know, when we get these beautiful, beautiful winter snowstorms and we're so excited and then it rains afterwards. This is a flood possibility scenario that we're obviously seeing more of. And then another thing, way to visualize, is the drought piece that I think is harder to think about because drought means lack of water, and yet drought means flooding is coming. And so if you think about it, if you water, anybody here has watered a plant. If you water a plant that's wet and you put on more water, it's going to overflow. If you water a plant that's dry, the same thing happens, the water overflows. And so when we're in this pendulum of drought and flood and drought and flood, flood, in fact, is actually what happens also during drought. So now that I've gotten a little of that doom and gloom out of the way, we'll zoom out to the watershed a little bit and talk about solutions. We are very lucky to have a lot of people in our community working towards solutions for flood resilience. We live in the biggest watershed in the state of Vermont, and we have a really amazing watershed group here in our part of the state, Friends of the Winooski. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them. They have taken out 3 dams in the last few years. They have 4 more dams that they're working on taking out. Every year they plant thousands and thousands of trees along rivers. They help communities navigate the future of buyouts. And they bring many, many communities together to talk together and share ideas and make sure everybody's building on each other's work. And so Friends of the Winooski can be a really, really wonderful partner for you all as you go forward in this process and think about what's next for the co-op. For us at Vermont River Conservancy, most of our work really happens upstream, out of town. We are mostly a land trust, and we specialize in protecting land along rivers. And specifically with the idea that knowing that we've straightened our rivers in so many places, not just in downtown Montpelier, 75% of all rivers in the state of Vermont, probably more, have been channelized. So if you're following a railroad or a road or a house, like even a lot of farms, like a lot of those places are all channelized. And so we look upstream with this idea that if we give rivers space and time, water knows what to do, nature knows what to do, and it's going to restore itself. And it's going to find the bends and curves of the river that instead of going a straight line shot, it's going to slow down and sink into the land and hold water upstream of communities and keep us safer downstream. So this is land we protected probably 20 or so years ago. This is actually along Highway 2 headed out towards Plainfield. At the time, this is a 2009 photo. There's some meandering channels there, but really single channel. And recently hayed fields. This is a little bit more recent shot of the same exact place that has a little bit more shrubbery along the river, and also has these riparian shrubs that are providing amazing habitat. And if you're driving up, you see I have a hard time driving that section of the road because I'm looking off at these beautiful wetlands a lot of the time. But it's these beautiful beaver-filled wetlands that are just filled with all these different channels that are doing an amazing job holding water upstream of Montpelier and doing what wetlands do best. And so that's the kind of conservation projects that we do. This is another one of our conservation easements. This is upstream on the north branch of the Winooski. And the landowner, it was kind of an island at the time of the 2023 floods. And so the landowner just kind of stepped out and took some pictures. And so this is looking upstream at the north branch of the Winooski, just barreling down, right? This is like rapids that you would want a raft to float down. And she turned 180 degrees to look across our conservation easement and the land that we had protected, and this is what it looks like. And so the water rose an incredible height here, but this is a lot of water that's not coming into downtown Montpelier. You can almost imagine, it's still, and you can almost imagine a heron just out there like doing its thing and fishing on this place. And this is the beauty of the places that we protect, is it's allowing nature to naturally restore, hold water, slow down rivers, and hold water upstream of communities to keep the rest of us safer downstream. We also do work here in town in Montpelier. So several of you have probably heard that we are working towards hopefully removing 4 dams in and upstream of Montpelier. So this, of course, is the Bailey Dam right near Shaw's. This, I haven't been using any notes here, now I have to catch up. Each of these dams that we're removing creates new opportunities for Montpelier. So what would our rivers look like if we took out the Bailey Dam or any of the dams? This is a simulation done by through the engineering studies of what that same stretch of river might look like without a dam. And what might be able to do on a free-flowing river? Could we go tubing through the middle of downtown Montpelier? Might we see kids on stand-up paddleboards? This is actually possible. And this is actually a way we can be connecting with our rivers right here in downtown Montpelier that is a little bit mind-blowing because it's totally not the way we're connecting with our rivers now. But this is potentially a future that we could look to in our watershed. So when I was with these kids, I asked them what they want for Montpelier's riverfront. And we did we looked at how we did these experiments of like rolling marbles down tubes and seeing that things go faster at a steeper slope. We did all these little science experiments that kind of relate back to hydrology and water. And then said, well, you built this watershed model. What would you do with this place? They had Legos that they had built to put out on it. And they said, we would have trees, really big trees, all around along the riverfront. There would be such big trees, and we would have a place to get into the water and go swimming right in downtown. And we would have parks all up and down the river. And they didn't have to think real long to come up with this vision. And what's amazing is that you all have a little slice of Montpelier, and you all might have a little way, a chance to make these kids' dream a reality. And so I'd encourage you all to think about your place and the context of the broader watershed and what's happening upstream and downstream. So when we look at that a little bit, here in the bottom of the picture where I've circled, upstream on the Stevens branch headed up to Barre, I mentioned before the Friends of the Winooski is taking out dams, working closely with communities in Barre to figure out where people might be able to access the river, especially in light of the many, many recent buyouts in Barre. Here's 5 Home Farm Way, which we named similar to this, 770 address thing. 5 Home Farm Way is the address. But if you look at this, look at the rivers coming in from the Stevens branch and the main Winooski. Look at them wiggle through there. Every time I look at this, I think this whole place really wants to just be one giant wetland complex. And we're probably a ways away from that. One of the reasons that this project took a really long time to get going is that one of the oldest houses in Montpelier was here. And if you think about it, the oldest houses in Montpelier built on the wetlands because they were already cleared land. And then they said, oh shoot, we're flooding. And they built up all the land around them so they wouldn't flood. And so what we end up with is higher and higher and higher ground, and the river can't get onto the land anymore. So what's exciting is that this project, as I know it, is ready to get underway next year. And when this floodplain is restored, this place can finally, for the first time in hundreds of years, welcome water back onto the floodplain that it once was. I just think that's super cool. And that's going forward for funding along with one of our dams. This is the Pioneer Dam. It's along the bike path just out of town, beyond the vet and Bar Hill. So that dam is going to be ready. We'll have the designs finished, and along with 5 Home Farm Way, those hopefully, if all goes according to plan, they can both happen in 2027, just a year from now. And then we have Bar Hill, and at Bar Hill, that was built in 2018, and it was one of the last large open undeveloped floodplains in Montpelier. And Bar Hill needed a zoning variance in order to build on the last undeveloped floodplain in Montpelier, and part of that agreement in order to build new construction on a floodplain was that they had to provide access to the river. So there is public access to the river. It's unsigned, it's unmaintained, but it is there, and it's a little glimmer of possibility of what might happen for our riverfront. And then, of course, here is you all, Hunger Mountain Co-op. And then just down the river from you is the Montpelier Rec Center. And the Montpelier Rec Center, the city actually owns the land all the way from the rec center down to the river. So maybe there could be something cool happening there. This here is right at the confluence of the North Branch and the Winooski. And so maybe someday Confluence River Park, which has been in city plans for like 30 or 40 years now, maybe someday there will be a park there. And in the meantime, we're working on taking out 2 dams right there, the Bailey Dam near Shaw's, and the Trestle Dam, which is just where the North Branch empties out. It's under the pedestrian bridge right there. And then there is the Elm Street buyout, which was a house. And then one day, you just go by and the house isn't there anymore. And this is open land that has the opportunity to have a little park by the river. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the high school, which, similar to the co-op, so you look at the co-op here, the river bends around this way. If anybody's paddled a canoe you know that when the rivers turn around this way, the floodplain's on that side. So by the co-op, the floodplain wants to be on river right. You get down to the high school and the river's bending around this way. That's the side that wants to be the floodplain. And we saw that during the 2023 floods. And that floodplain is a little out of practice at being a floodplain. And so that's an opportunity there for our community. And when you put all of these projects together, it begins to look a little bit like a string of pearls. And it looks a little bit like something like Frederick Law Olmsted might be really excited about if you think about the string of pearls park concept. And something that we all as a community could be really proud of as we link together these multiple opportunities for river restoration and public access to the river and connecting with our rivers. Some of you might be here tonight looking forward to hearing from me, but many of you are probably here for the food and the good company of all of those things. But what I know is that all of you came here to celebrate community. And as I understand it, community is at the heart of what the co-op stands for. It's why you have members, and it's why you're members. It's why I'm just gonna swing by the co-op errand, might be a little bit longer, because you're probably gonna run in one or more people who you know, and it's gonna take a little while. It's why you know your farmers, and it's why you donate to the causes that are essential to this place that we call home. That's all because of community, and it's why you're here. I know that. And so here's the seed that I've been wanting to plant this whole time, is that as you all go forward in this planning process, I want you to think about the river as a member of your community. And water is the ultimate communal resource. And the elusive flood resilience that we're all working towards is really only going to happen when the community as a whole, up and down the river, along farmlands and wetlands, downtown at your home, and right here in this co-op community, you have the chance to embrace the river and as a key member of this co-op community and welcome it in and lead the way for all of us in this community as you look ahead. Thanks. So I think question and answer time was advertised, which I'm glad to take questions. Yeah. They're coming around with a mic for you. Perfect.
Thank you very much for this interesting talk. I'd like to ask if you can help clarify something. We've had the Great Brook flood a number of times in Plainfield, and something like 20 or 30 years ago, the Army Corps of Engineers came in and dredged the brook and get rid of all the boulders and all the stuff so the water could flow more easily. And the idea is just to get the water out of town, I guess, so it doesn't do so much damage. And apparently that didn't work. And so more recently, a friend of mine who's a hydrologist oversaw a project of dumping a whole bunch of boulders and detritus and stuff back into the channel to slow the water as it's coming down during a torrential rain. And if I'm not mistaken, this past flood, and it was 23 or 24, there was a whole bunch of wood debris in the channel, and they dug it all out and hauled it away. So what I'd like a better understanding of is, at least one school of thought says we leave this stuff in the channel because it helps slow down the water and mitigate the flow and reduce damage. Another school of thought seems to think we need to get that stuff out of the way and make it flow better. I'm guessing you would not advocate removing the Wrightsville Dam. So can you help us understand why in some cases it's better to remove a dam, and other cases it's better to leave it there?
This is the question of the evening. Oh my goodness, we could spend all night talking about this. So those were very different. You went to dams at the end, which I'm going to have a different answer for. But so water, when we think of a river, we think of it as water. But a river is not just carrying water. A river is carrying a whole bunch of sediment and other things with it, right, as it goes along. And I did this activity with those same kids, actually, where I had those kids run from point A to point B and said, run from here to there, and we ran a little stopwatch. And then I put up cones, and I had them zigzag. And I said, see if you can beat your time, zigzagging. They could not beat their time, obviously. They had to slow down on every single curve. Now, if you have a bottle and it is filled with not just water, but maybe also some sand and rocks, you could imagine if that gets shook up because you're running, it's going to take all that stuff with it. So the problem with straightening rivers, the problem with taking stuff out of the way, is that you are removing said obstacle course that slows down water and drops things to the bottom, and you're encouraging the water to take all that stuff with it all the way down the river. And now, I highly recommend this book that Carl was pitching. There are at least more than 20 communities floating around, 20 books floating around in our community. So somebody you know has one of these and is ready to hand it off. And one of the premises of this book is that we have a long history of, and this is not just Americans, but I would say around the world, making decisions for ourselves. And when every person makes a decision for themselves, what might be best for them is not necessarily best for their neighbor. So if you have your land and you want to keep it dry, yeah, you're going to shed that water as fast as you can. You're going to put tiling under your fields. You're going to have ditching. You're going to get rid of that water. Well, where does that go? And it turns out we all live together in the same watershed, and we've all got to play together. And so not only is that not really great for the next folks downstream, but even for you, when you do that, you're making the water faster and more erosive. And so what I think back many years ago, and even now, some people think like, let's take all that stuff out and get the water moving on its way. It's actually not great for you, and it's not great for your neighbors. And so we're kind of left with those consequences now. And hopefully that answers a little bit of the Boulder. And as you know, I met maybe the same hydrologist or geologist. I walked up and down the Plainfield flood, and it is incredible. If anybody hasn't been up Great Brook, it is like these like Alaska-size it's phenomenal, and it's horrific, right? Like if you live there, that is scary. And the story I was told is that as part of that erosion, it also took down whole trees, which really jammed themselves up in the river. And we, as the state of Vermont, spent I don't know how much money sending in people to cut out those trees and get the water moving on its way. But really, like, those were so jammed in, they weren't going to go anywhere. And if you leave that, that's actually going to slow down the river and actually help it gain its equilibrium and it gain its point of stability to stop being so erosive. And so one of the challenges, again, Tim Ballmer mentions this in Seek Higher Ground, but after a flood, we all want to see something happen. And we say, can we get something done like yesterday, tomorrow? Can we make this happen? And so like a long time ago, that was the dams. So you asked about the dams. Wrightsville, that was built in the 1930s in response to the 1927 floods when the community said, get something done. And so we did. We built a big dam. And it's really working as flood control. The problem with these other dams, so Wrightsville Dam is designed with a reservoir down here, and it can rise, and there's space. It's like this great big bowl, right? So it can hold more water. If you look at Bailey Dam downtown, if you go to Shaw's and just stand on the edge and look down over the guardrail, please be safe when you do this, but when you do it, you will see that there's like 6 inches of water. That's like a, I don't know, 8-foot tall dam. So that means there's 8 feet of sediment and 6 inches of water. So Bailey Dam is not holding back water. And in fact, when the flood comes, because it's holding 8 feet of sediment, it's already artificially 8 feet higher than it would be. So if you take out the dam, you move all that sediment, you get the water down here. Next time the flood comes, there's actually a little bit more space in the river. Whereas Wrightsville Dam, that's a big bowl. You stand at the top of Wrightsville and you look down and there's what, like 50, 60 feet for water to continue rising up. And in fact, it used to be even more. So until 1985, the reservoir was 15 feet lower. And the hydropower company wanted to have hydropower. And they said the only way this is going to make sense is if we lift up the height of the reservoir. So the reservoir is 15 feet higher than it used to be, only for the hydropower. The hydropower is actually not profitable anymore. It's for sale. And if that reservoir were lowered another 15 feet, that again is another 15 feet of flood storage capacity upstream of Montpelier. That was not more of an answer than you were looking for. We maybe only had time for one question. Sorry, guys.
I'll keep this one very quick.
I can keep it quick, too.
You were talking about sediments. Question on sediment in the Pioneer Street Dam. I hear that it may be contaminated with something from where Wind River Environmental is. Can you speak to what you found on that?
Yeah, so we thought it was going to be worse than it is. So Wind River Environmental, for those who are familiar with the name, it's the porta potty facility right by the roundabout. That site, I don't know how long, 100 years ago, whenever people were using coal tar to power stuff, it was a coal tar plant. So they were producing coal tar there. And just, I don't know exactly what coal tar is, but I hear the name and I think that is bad, and it is bad for you, and it is. And so when they went to redevelop that site, the byproduct of the coal tar had all this toxic remediation needed. Well, when you do remediation to redevelop a site on land, you're only required to do remediation on land. So our assumption was if it was on the land, then it's also in the river. So when we went down this process of the feasibility studies, we actually thought the sediment would be worse than it is. So it actually wasn't, it is not perfect. It's not like you can just like dump it out in your neighbor's lawn and call it good. You've got to truck that stuff out, but it's not as bad as we thought it was gonna be, which is actually good for, in some ways helping to keep the cost down for the dam removal.
Hi, great talk, thank you. This is a geology watershed question. The Winooski makes a dramatic cut through the spine of the Green Mountains in Bolton and Richmond. It's like 3,000 feet of vertical through there. If you look on a map, it's like really impossible. I'm wondering if you have any insight into why that is, and just an acknowledgement there too that if it weren't for that, we'd be in a lake here.
So you're talking about the very headwaters of the Winooski, yes? Richmond and Bolton.
No,
got
where it goes through in Bolton, you've got Camel's Hump over here,
Yeah.
and then it's like really dramatic.
Yeah. Somebody else here might know the answer to this question. I don't know the answer completely. It seems like to me when I look at that like the river probably went a different way before. And to the extent that I was just making a map of all the rivers of the state of Vermont and just the outlines, so state with like little squiggles. And the Winooski River went like all the way over on the right to like almost the Connecticut River. And I looked at it, I was like, oh shoot, we messed up the map because the river can't go from like one side to the other. And then I was like, wait a second, it starts all the way over there. It looks like it should, go right over to the Connecticut. So I don't know all of the geologic history, but like it looks to me like our rivers maybe flowed another way at some point. I'm really not sure. Does anybody know the answer to that question? Aaron, do you know?
I don't know if this exactly answers your question, but the Winooski River did used to drain thousands of, like as the glaciers were retreating, it did drain southeast into the Connecticut River, or what we now call the Winooski River. Actually, here we would have been under a giant glacial lake that is posthumously called Lake Winooski. But all of downtown Montpelier was not only a wetland, but it was actually a giant lake, and that's why in downtown we have all these amazing clay deposits that are really deep, was because it would have been the center of the lake.
Thank you, Erin. I knew somebody was going to have a better answer for me on that one.
Just a quick comment on that. If you want to see an example of what happened when that drainage backed up, made a dam naturally, that then washed out, you can see an old beach at Ananda's Gardens. You get up there and there is a flat plain that used to be a beach to that lake at some point, and there are many levels at which that happened and many iterations of Lake Vermont. What is it called, Lake Vermont? Lake Winooski, whatever. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah. It's a complex history. I know about this much of it. I wanted to make another very quick comment that's a sort of feel-good possibility, I think. I happened when Bar Hill opened to have a very brief conversation with one of the owners, Ryan, or I think his name was, and he told me how happy they were to open, but one of the big disappointments was that the driveway was going to be permeable. But in their budgeting, they were not able at the last minute to afford it. Now, if I have the story up to date, I think that is still a non-permeable surface, the parking area, the vast parking. And now they're doing really well. And it just occurs to me that a bunch of us should, in a very encouraging way, urge Bar Hill to pick up that piece that they so very much wanted to contribute to Montpelier.
Hi. I know everything's expensive, but when I read about the dam removal proposals, like on the smaller dams in Montpelier, the price tag just seems incredible, like $2 million or something like that to remove one of these small dams. And I'm thinking, well, wouldn't you just get a kind of a big backhoe and kind of take a corner out and let the sediment flow out for a year or so and then take some more out? But do you have any insight as to why it's so expensive to remove a small dam like that? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. If you imagine, like, Bailey Dam is, I don't know, 6 feet tall sediment. It's a giant triangle of sediment that goes back probably like a mile over, basically up to the Pioneer Street Dam. So that's probably a mile and a half. And that's a lot of sediment if you start at, 6 or 8 feet at one end and taper off all the way to the other. And you can't just let all of that downstream because it's going to cover up the other stuff downstream. And so sediment is a natural part of our rivers. Sediment should be flowing back and forth all the time. But the problem is we've put up all these barriers and changed the flow so much that if you were to take all of that and just like release into the world, it would cause problems for the river downstream. So it needs to be trucked out a lot. Most of the cost of a dam removal is in fact sediment management. So we think of it as like water management or taking out a hunk of cement. It's mostly trying to figure out what to do with the sediment and where to bring it. So that's most of the cost. I also, I don't have this number at my fingertips, maybe somebody else does, but I know that, $11 million that the city's just about to get from like FEMA or something? The cost of the floods was what, 24 million? Or like the high school was like a decent chunk of that already. So if you take the cost of a single flood, that is far more than any one of a dam removal or floodplain restoration or any of these things. And we need all those things to add up in order to really see the flood resilience we want to see. And each of those projects we look at and we're like, my, that is mighty expensive. Well, you know what's more expensive? is the next flood. And the flood after that is also more expensive than that one. So our chance now is actually a scream and deal to do something about it before the next flood comes.
So I have a question about planting. I remember seeing an image of a property along Elm Street where there's a community garden, and just above or below it there's an area that was planted in maybe natural local plants, native plants I think is the word, and nearby there was lawn, and one flooded and the other absorbed a lot of water. So I'm wondering what there is along that line that's happening around Montpelier already, and in what way, with your vision of a park on at least part of the co-op property, that element with the big trees the kids imagined, how much that could contribute, and can that coexist with other same time uses of the property like housing? Can you do two things at once, or do you need it all?
That's a great question. I think I would say that in Montpelier we have a tradition of trying to do all the things in every single project that we do. So everything we do, we try to like solve everything, every single crisis in one place. So that's probably not possible to do all the things in the same place. The riparian plantings that you mentioned, it's the Elm Street Community Gardens before up the river from here, before you get to the pool and the ball fields. They're on your right. That, I believe, was actually a project done in partnership with Friends of the Winooski, who I mentioned, and they do home site visits. So they'll come to your home or probably your business and do an assessment and say, hey, what kind of riparian shrubs and trees could be planted here? Where might it make sense to have a rain garden? And they'll do an analysis of that, and I think, don't quote me on this, but I think may have some funds to help implement some of that as well. The reality is the opportunities are different on every parcel. So when you're looking at the Elm Street Community Gardens, they've got this long sloping, like back field, and you're absolutely right. Their neighbor's lawn that's mowed all the way down to the river, that flooded, and you could see the water built up and it just absorbed the water where they had done these riparian restorations. So you can really see the difference that it makes. Is that a possibility for the co-op? I mean, I showed you this like huge sweep of the river. That whole thing would like to be a floodplain. Is that realistic? I mean, it could be if we wanted to like knock on every neighbor's door up and down the river right there and have people quit their land and like do a giant floodplain restoration. That doesn't seem like that's where our community is headed and what's possible. So the question is, what's the best we can do in this place at this time? And it's probably not going to be the same looking variety of floodplain restoration based on the other uses around it. But I think the question is, how do you do the best you can possibly do in that space? And it's gonna look real different.
I have a question and a comment, and maybe I understand now, but is it wrong to take silt out from a dam where it's just been collected, or is it just too expensive?
To take silt out of a dam that's gonna stay there, or a dam you're
Yeah.
taking? You can do that. I know the hydro dam, it's like Montpelier Hydro number 4. It's just up the river from Pioneer, between Pioneer and Hidden Dams. They have silt there just that they need to get out of the river in order to keep the hydro dam functioning. I also know that silt is absolutely jam-packed with knotweed seeds.
Yeah.
And so anybody, what you risk, and that if you're gonna go take some sediment from behind a dam and like throw it in your garden, is like a really incredible invasives problem. And you really shouldn't just be going and like pulling sediment out of rivers willy-nilly. I don't know if that answered your question,
Yeah,
but I
I
know
think
they
it
do that
does,
there.
and it's also, it is very expensive to do, which I hadn't even considered. Because, dredging is considered low on the totem pole as to what you should do with the river, as to, clear out the sediment and stuff. I did have just a comment in terms of creating wetlands. Insects, mosquitoes. Most people aren't going to want to live by a wetland.
So Aaron has probably spent more time in wetlands than most of us here, so maybe he can vet this. But my experience in a wetland is that your run-of-the-mill created wet pool that maybe is called a wetland, but is in fact not a functioning wetland. It's like, the equivalent of like the corner of the Walmart parking lot that's like made into a wetland. Those types of places are not highly functioning wetlands and have more mosquito breeding pools and all those things. As I know them, the wetlands that are actually functioning wetlands with the frogs and the dragonflies and all those other things that are part of those ecosystems, the ecosystem takes care of itself and the mosquitoes are not a problem. And so I think our perception of wetlands, we have so many, just our language around wetlands, like the dark swamp, there's so many words that we use that are kind of derogatory to wetlands. But in fact, when they're functioning, they're actually really vibrant, beautiful places, which is why I started with that at the beginning of the presentation. Because when that diversity of life happens, they take care of the insects.
Oh.
Yeah, so I work with endangered plants a lot as well. And so in terms, to answer your question also about insects, for Vermont's endangered plants, I would say the majority, what we see is the majority of endangered plants that we have in Vermont live in wetlands, or there are a lot of endangered wetland plants that really is a place where a lot of our biodiversity is concentrated. And as far as insects, I think also if you really like birds, a lot of our birds are really, really dependent on insects to complete their life cycles, especially to raise their young. And a lot of those insects are also coming from wetlands, it's true, but it's also, that is what feeds our birds and feeds our whole cycles. So it's part of the entire web.
I think we have time for one last question.
So I'm definitely interested in a cleaner, safer river, but I'm also very focused on this housing crisis. And so I'm just wondering if you think, should we be thinking about developing uphill more? And we've done a lot of limitation of, conserving in parkland and protecting spaces that are high and dry, and meanwhile overdeveloping in river plains, right? And so if we want to build housing, should it be, this is a neighborhood that already has some buildings but could densify, but then there's also areas, you mentioned Hubbard Park being cleared before. Are there areas that we should be putting things in if we also might be taking things out elsewhere?
Yeah, I think the reality, I think the root of that question is, should we be having people live around, like, new development along rivers? And the reality is that when you build housing, when you build anything along a river, it will flood. And it may not be tomorrow or the next day, but it will flood because water doesn't stay where it's put. It's going to do what it does. So when you build along a river, you are effectively putting people in harm's way. And I think the question is, how do you build that in a way that makes space for the river and allows the river to do its thing while keeping people safe or whatever that infrastructure is? And that's a tricky thing to figure out. The world over has this problem, and there are umpteen solutions looking internationally and around the country of communities who have done this. And so I think that's actually an exciting thing as you all, as riverfront property owners at the co-op, move forward in this process. Think about how you find that balance of welcoming the river into this space while also figuring out how to utilize that space to benefit the community. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Kasia, for joining us tonight. We really appreciate all of the information you've shared with us. Let's give her another round of applause. Thank you. Thank everybody here for being here tonight. We really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us and learn more about this really important topic. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you in the near future. Thank you. Great job. Wow. Whole hour?